All right, so Abra, or Abram, is again the servant of Ra, the lover of Ra, what have you. So this whole story of Abraham or Abram being told by his God to do certain things, to create a covenant, which is basically in the book of Genesis, which is obviously the root of that is the same root as genetics or genes, to create a bond or a covenant to a specific gene or bloodline or genetic line. What is he going to do? Okay? To me, in reading that story and understanding the nature of psychological, psychic, sexual, physical trauma, mind control techniques that have been perfected, that story is the a priori story of mind control, of bonding the male principle. Because for me, as a father of a son, the most abhorrent thought that I could imagine is being told you must kill your son to be obedient to your God. Okay? And so, as the lover of Ra, you read the story. It says his name is Abram and he will become Abraham. And, the word Ham or Ham, Hamlet, all the British English words, a village or a town or a tribe. He will create a tribe by binding a covenant. And the word covenant in Aramaic means to break bread. And the Virgo, the Virgin, which was, we were in the age of Virgo 13,000 years ago, as we're entering into that, is known as the bread carrier, the bread deliverer. So it's when Virgo, the Virgin, who will birth the prodigal son, going backwards as the ages go, from Virgo to Leo, to break the bread, to deliver the sun god. Abraham must create a tribe and bind his genetics by creating that primary male split to choose between his son and his God. Okay? And as we know in mind control, you create a severe enough trauma, the mind splits. Okay? There again, it's inculcating into an institutionalized construct that is the primary building block of Judeo-Christian structure and belief, that the male, the father principle, will be subjugated to that God and literally murder his son on a rock. In Latin, the word rock is Petra, okay, which comes from the Egyptian creator god Ptah, where we also get the name Peter, okay? And what do we call the male genitalia? A Peter. We also call it a Johnson, the son of John. Okay? John the Baptist, who will be dismembered and the head will be separated from the member. So we have an obelisk here and we have the head or the capital here, which is the primary split of that masculine principle that has been severed or split or separated by that primary story of the Isis-Osiris mystery cult, the dismembering of Osiris, the artificial phallus, the raising of artificial phallus, and John's head, which is the precursor to the rising of the sun, the integration. It will be built on the rock of Peter, the creation god in Egypt, Ptah, where Abram is told to sacrifice his son, who will become Isaac, right? And his sons, the genetic line, will be Isaac's sons, or the Saxons, which is the genetic line. So Abram complies with the order of his God, and truly, absolutely, and unequivocally goes to do the deed. And when the God sees that this will be done, he says, okay, you don't have to, and I am now going to bind your seed and create your Hamlet or your tribe to be the chosen one through a genetic line to come down through history as the Saxons or the sons of Isaac, to carry that on and to fulfill the covenant. Okay, what is the covenant? We will get into that more later, but basically it is at the end of time to meet back in Israel to fulfill the Sion principle, or the Zion, to merge the two pillars, the line of the king and the line of the priest. Okay, we're going to get into how that is all constructed in our modern structure and how it historically was developed and evolved, and to build it on the rock of Peter, or Patah. So the whole New Testament is, as Jordan talks about it, an astrological, astronomical, numerical, sacred geometry, metaphorical construct. Okay, so it starts with the beheading of John, which is a restatement of the dismembering and the cutting off of the head. Okay, what is the first thing that is handed to Abraham as the law that he must fulfill, or his tribe must fulfill? They must symbolically and ritually castrate or dismember the newborn male by circumcision on the 9th day after birth. Okay, symbolically the Council of Nine. So they reproduce the Isis-Osiris castration by symbolically, beheading the little male penis in the form of circumcision, recreating the covenant.
Wow.
Okay?
So again, another ingrained.
Right. And then there's the whole story afterwards of, of then the splitting. And you'll notice in history, there's always male lineages splitting. There's Ishmael, and that becomes the, one Semitic tribe, the tribe of Shem or Ham. Remember Ham, the village, or Shem, the Shem-Anah, okay? And the other is Isaac, who become, they're related, they come from the same source, but now what do we have today? We have the splitting of the Islamic world and the Jewish, so-called Judaic world. And we're going to go through a lot of different things. I'm not going to go into it now, but we'll do it after lunch, of how all of this is literally an outpicturing of the human physical body. Okay, the 7 chakras, the 3 primary bodies of the physical, emotional, and mental, how that is outpictured into the control system of the whole planet. And you will be amazed when you start seeing it. So back to Akhenaten for a moment. He was chased out of town, The other priesthoods didn't like what he was doing, but he had sufficiently consolidated it. And when he left, he went east, and part of the team went west, okay? He transmuted himself, so to speak, literarily speaking, from Akhenaten into Moses. He was who the Old Testament talks about as Moses, and eventually settled in that place called Jerusalem, or in that area. What's the story of Jerusalem? Jerusalem goes back to I'm going to use my pointer. If you follow the lineage in that same period of the fall and the reemergence of the Atlantean knowledge and so forth, you have a descent of people who are up here in Scandinavia who come down into the British Isles and eventually come all the way through this area in what I described as setting up the Druidic colleges and all the rest of it, and ended up on the shore here and settled in an area called Canaan, okay, which is phonetically very close to And what happens when, the people leave Egypt, according to the Old Testament story, and they go back to the Promised Land? They have to kill all the Canaanites, right? Okay. Well, Canaan, the Canaanites, the original Canaanites, actually came from Scandinavia, through the British Isles, through this area in Iberia, through the Mediterranean, and settled here. They held that principle of balance between the masculine and feminine. Okay, their feminine principle was known as Shalem. And there's an original word called to found. And they found Canaan on the principle of that feminine principle of Shalem, or honoring the feminine in balance with the masculine, not castrating and splitting the masculine to dominate out of impotence and rage the feminine through what we've seen in history the last 2,000 years and plus. Uru Shalem means founded upon Shalem, out of which phonetically you can see where Jerusalem comes from. But then you have in the Abrahamic storyline, after that first splitting of the male psyche and the covenant and the seed, genetic binding to the seed, who shows up is Melchizedek, who is really part of two priesthoods, the priesthood of Michael and Zadok. And it says that Melchizedek was the king priest, right? The merger of the king and the priest, because he's going to set the template to overlay on Jerusalem the masculine construct to control the feminine, or control life. Because the whole game here is ultimately control and own life and everybody's life force, all the way down to your cellular structure and your DNA and the human genome. Bind it to the law, what's happening now, the Human Genome Project, binding through patenting the control of life itself, and Monsanto through the seeds and everything else that we know is going on. Control life. Take the king and the priest who will control land and all the wealth from the land, and the priests who will bind the law, overlay it. So what's the story? Okay, Abraham, you did your deed. Now you're going to be given the covenant to control Jerusalem. So Melchizedek, the king priest, goes to Jerusalem, hands the keys to Abraham, and said, now you are the king of Jerusalem. Okay. Now, an interesting thing when we look at the sphere of the planet and the numerologically and the geometry of numbers and time and space in the spherical shape of the planet, and then the overlay of this grid, interestingly, if we look at Jerusalem and Israel, you know where it falls? 33 degrees, 33 degrees.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
Does it really?
Yes.
Wow. I never noticed it.
Yep. And see, that's the whole thing of the decoder ring. Once you start seeing all the pieces and you remove the belief systems and the overlays, you just start looking for, where these things are placed. There's no accident where Rome ends up and Jerusalem and London and all the rest of it. Okay. So, before that, of course, we have Babylon, or, El is another one of the articles, the light, baby light, later to become the light of the light.
Wow. Oh my God.
Okay? Because when Akhenaten and his team got kicked out of Egypt, one part of the team went west to fulfill this story, which was fabricated. This whole story of Abraham, Melchizedek, etc., was all put together. All these guys snorting their white powder back there in Egypt in the land of Akhenaten, which, by the way, one of the principal cities that they lived in Egypt was called Avaris, which is where we get our English word avarice, which is unrepentant, uninhibited greed and avarice, okay? And where they went up to the plains of Sharon to download the template of how this external manifestation of this construct through the binding of the law. So, okay, we're going to create the law. We're going to create the Levite priesthood to create the law, and we're going to create the temple system and everything else. It's going to come down through Sumer, Babylon, Acadia, into pre-biblical, biblical period Rome, and all the way till today. So Akhenaten and his team went east as Moses, retranslated as Moses, to create the Mosaic Law. And the Ten Commandments is nothing more than certain initiatory requirements of the initiates under the mystery school of Horus. It was not thou shalt not, but there were certain levels of energetic components. Thou shalt honor thy mother and father. That was more integrating where you inherited the masculine feminine from the parents and integrating it. Thou shalt not kill was at a different level than just shooting somebody. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery means to adulterate. It has nothing to do with fraternizing with somebody outside of marriage. It means to adulterate a pure genetic bloodline. Thou shalt not adulterate your bloodline, because we must keep it pure, because that genetic bloodline becomes a resonant frequency system that you are more attuned to the genetic line bounded by that covenant, so that later on your descendants can continue and maintain the continuity of the game plan. Okay? So Akhenaten and team, Akhenaten's wife was Nefertiti, and of course one of their sons was named King Tut. Remember? Tutankhamun? Well, one of the things you don't know is or perhaps you do, but most people don't, the eldest daughter was known as Mary Taten. Of course, Aten. This is where we get the name Mary, okay, which of course is in the Bible and all the rest of it. And her husband was known as Gaithars, where we get all kinds of words: Caesars, Kaisars, Tsars. Okay? They went west, back to where they knew the root and the source of the scientific knowledge they were working on came from. She was also known by a second name called Skota, which is where the name Scotland comes from. Okay? So in 1300 or 1350 BC, they went west and resettled here to eventually birth La'an Da'an, because they knew from much older information and scientific knowledge that that location there had very specific and important geomantic qualities, where they would root the western capital and then they would root the eastern capital here. Of course, you have Rome in between, directly in between, almost a direct linear line. And there's a lot of work you're probably familiar of all the geometry from Giza to Jerusalem and all the rest of it. All kinds of interesting things. We're going to get into more and more layers of all of this and how it's constructed on the planetary scale and all the rest of it. But Mary Taten and Gaithars went west to start establishing the control system through the British Isles, eventually bringing the Saxons over to get the Anglo-Saxons, and Akhenaten and Nefertiti went east. There was an archaeologist named Petrie, Petrie, in the early 1900s, found right here in the Sinai desert, where most likely that scene, that image of Moses going up to the mountain and the burning fire and everything, actually a laboratory, temple and laboratory system where they were created, and they found white powder everywhere, creating the monatomic gold. Let me see, there was one other fact I wanted to throw in there. It'll come back to me.
So that site is not in Mount Sinai?
No, it's not Mount Sinai. I forget. It's in Lawrence Gardner's work. He talks about that in one or several of his books. Oh, so the Canaanites were holding that honoring of the feminine principle. They had to be destroyed. Jerusalem had to be destroyed and overtaken or overlaid. That male dominance, the king and the priest, overlaying it. We will see throughout history overlaying that with symbolic naming of the feminine and then the overlay. For example, we have over here this place called Washington, D.C. Okay, if you read the Constitution, it says that a district will be established for the United States that will be taken from one or more territory from one or more of the states, and this will become the federal territory. Well, the two states that they took it from were Virgin Maryland. Okay, it's a recreation of the overlay of Jerusalem. The king priest now establishing commercial law in one of the three city-states of the planet, which is basically an outpicturing of our three bodies, our physical, emotional, and mental bodies, so that the physical body is Washington, D.C., controlling the physical commerce of our creation. The mental body is the city of London, where the crown sits, controlling money and gold and banking and all the rest of it. Rome, or the Vatican City, is the emotional body, controlling the spirit. Okay, so that's the outpicturing of our three physical bodies. There's outpicturing of our 7 chakras in different places around the planet that I'm going to get into later.
Any significance to DC and Rome being approximately on the same latitude?
Yeah, I'm sure that there's exactly...
You discovered it.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the basic setup. Create the split, control the male through the polarization, create the line of the king, the line of the priest, create a basis institutionally that God, no less, said, you do this and you will be the chosen one and you will be given this promised land where you will control, that 33-degree latitude, longitude location, which, by the way, have you ever heard of something called the Rift of Africa? Okay. The Rift of Africa runs like all the way through here, these lakes, and all the way up to the Dead Sea. You know where it ends? Jerusalem. Okay. So the other thing is, if we look at the outpicturing of our 7 chakras, we have 7 continents. 6 of the 7 start and end in the English language with the letter A. Okay. 1 has the letter, the first syllable sound tone is the word Do you know where Abraham came from? Ur. The city of Ur, the land of Uruk. Okay. You can tell us this or confirm it, in German and other prototypical languages, that root word or that root sound tone basically means primordial, original, ancient, the original source of something. Okay. This is also the suffix of the word urinology, urine, urology. Where does urology start? In the root chakra. Okay. So controlling that root and birthing an artificial construct of everything I've described from the land of moving up to the second chakra, okay? Because here is the root chakra that has manifested by our exterior manifestation, that split that I'm talking about. Literally, it split the planet in the root chakra, going up that spine, up the Nile River, ending in Jerusalem. Second chakra being Uruk, and the control of the money system in this place called Zurich. Okay, moving that creator capacity where we're supposed to ground ourselves into the body, but it's lifted up to the second chakra. So instead of being integrated, balanced, and whole and grounded, we're short-circuiting, and we keep on spewing out our creator capacity by that buildup of charge and discharge and so forth, where the male principle is constantly in rut and constantly seeking to express itself by fucking the world, basically, you know, and creating this externalized system of money and law in which we are bound by contract and jurisdiction and all the rest, and we're taken into their temples of justice where we keep on being charged and discharged and creating more and more of this money system continuously and by design intended to be eternally. Okay, but there's a rub in terms of that we'll talk about tomorrow. So the third chakra is Asia, the fourth is Australia, the fifth, the communication center, is North America, the sixth is South America, and the seventh is Antarctica at the South Pole, covered with ice, frozen. Okay, so that we don't really have our seventh chakra open, and we don't have our root chakra grounded. You know, we can't receive from ourselves the higher level of understanding and insight information. We can't ground into our physical body. You know, all of this manifested through symbolic things where the Jewish temple rule is that the male has to cover his seventh chakra. We do not want him to be receiving anything other than what we let him receive. Okay. The priests of the Catholic Church must bind their fifth chakra so they don't speak the truth. Okay. The Hindu Brahmins must have their women put a symbolic Band-Aid or tap on their sixth chakra so they don't see anything. You know, the Christians must box in their heart chakra, because what happens when you take this shape okay, if you fold these up to the side and fold this up to the side and this closes the top, you box in the seventh chakra. Okay? I mean the fourth chakra, the heart. You know, this is the dance of Salome, sealing the chakras, okay, closing them off so we're not open, we're not grounded, we're not receiving our higher intelligence, and we're not really capable of expressing through the rest of the system. The third chakra, well, first of all, let's go to the second chakra. What is the Islamic primary symbol is the black cube, okay, where all the males do the Hajj, or the pilgrimage, and they go in a counterclockwise, locking it in, okay? If they went this way, they would be opening it up. Just like on the planetary sphere, when the solar winds hits the North Pole, if you were able to look at it from on top, it does create a magnetic wind that symbolically looks like that. But the way it turns to create the magnetic field is clockwise. But the Nazis did it counterclockwise, which locks us in. Okay? Where did that symbol originate? Two places. Southern China, Tibet, and the Four Corners. Okay? Both established that symbol. But you can do a very easy experiment if you understand kinesiology. This is a right spinning, okay? because as if these were streamers or arms spinning. If you do it the other way, the way the Nazis did it, do it both ways and have somebody do a muscle test. When you put your finger on it right spinning, you're strong. When you do it on left spinning, you're weak. Okay? So it's about locking in, involuting the life force and locking us into the body and controlling our greater capacity. Okay? So the Hajj, the pilgrimage, which started before Muhammad showed up, was this little enclosure in Mecca where a guy had this walled area, and when they came to water at the oasis and so forth and do whatever they did, trade camels, they had to walk around like 3 or 5 times. And he had the stone gods inside that you could then go in if you walked around the proper amount of times. That grew to be Mecca in the big cube, in the stadium built by the Bin Ladens and all the rest of it. And then you have the symbol of the moon and the star of Islam. And then, of course, you have the split root chakra. So one last thing, and then we'll take a break. We talked about the merging to create Israel. And Isis, the moon goddess, who had many names. One of her names was Sin, which became Sinai, or the Sinai Peninsula, which is the basis of the moon cult that became Islam. You know, that's why you have the moon here. Of course, they had a star too. The moon goddess was also known as Mon, also known as Min. Of course, the sun, S-O-N, or S-U-N, of course, was Horus. So we have the word minutes. We have the word hours. We have the word in Latin or Spanish, semana, which is basically semen, you know, the root, the seed of the genetic lines. We have the word money. These are all moon cult structures of how we are controlled through time, through money, through sex, through our seed, through the eggs, you name it. Okay, we can go through the 7 days of the week. Of course, Sunday was the day of the sun. Monday was the day of the moon, Monday. Tuesday, which is known also like in Latin and Spanish as Martes, is the day of Mars. Wednesday comes from the Wotan dog, from Scandinavian, you know. Thursday comes from Thor. It's Thor's day. Friday comes from Frege or something like that, who was also one of the 3, you know, mother, father, son with Wotan, Thor, and Frege. Of course, Saturday comes from Saturn. Saturn Day, it's also known as Sabado or Sabbath Day in Spanish. So we have cycles of time broken into incremental numerical. And numerology, of course, is critical and absolutely one of the key things in the whole structure that I'm sure you're mostly familiar with. So I'm going to leave that as our closing for the morning, and we'll take a break. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes.